Afternoon, Mike.
Hello, Peter.
Um, Today we're going to talk about rehearsal structure and about the sort of way in which you would work out what happens during a day or during a week or even during the whole process. So start us off there, Mike. Where do you want to begin?
Well, the most important thing is to create a very good structure for your rehearsals. Try to visualize all the time you have in advance. Now, it's quite likely you won't be able to keep to all of it, or you might want to change it. But if you have a structure, you can always go back to it and you know where you are. If you start without any plan, you can just get lost and muddled. It also gives the actors a sense of security that you know what you're doing. So that's the most important thing to say to start with. Uh, the second is when I work, I try to separate out all the different techniques that we'll be exploring, because in my memory of early rehearsals and observations of other people's rehearsals, they tend to get muddled up with everybody's agenda. So the director will, let's say they start working on a scene, and then somebody will stop and ask about the political relevance, and then somebody else will ask about how they're feeling in the scene, and then somebody else will ask about the relevance of the piece, and somebody will ask, what's the space going to be? Look, there's a sort of clutter. And what happens often, and I've heard actors say this, we were in rehearsal 6 hours today, we didn't do anything, or a rather pushy, or shall we say selfish actor takes over the rehearsal with their questions and their observations, while the others are left to kick their heels and wait around. So I always want to make sure that we're all on the same track and we're all doing the same exploration together. And also what this does over a period of time, because the actors are always there together, they, by a sort of osmosis as well as intellectual and physical work, they are developing a unified world in which they all behave in the same way. You can believe they all come from the same place, the same stylistic world, which is very important, because they're growing and learning together from doing, observing, being there, and very focused. So we deal with one problem at a time. Now, the next thing I do, or I do from the beginning, is I split up my rehearsal day into 3 strands, because it seems to be there's 3 areas of work that we're going to conduct. One is the work on the text, which is the actions, the objectives, what the scene's about, the conflicts, the obstacles, the actual meat. Okay. The second is the characters, and the third is the world of the play, the stylistic level at which the play is to be performed. And they all need their own space and time. And it's very good to take the character away from merely being connected with the text and explore it, not neglecting the text, but taking it outside the text to look at it. So, and then I say let's say I've got an average of 6 hours in a rehearsal day. I can do an hour of world, an hour of character, an hour of text, an hour of world, an hour of character, an hour of text, or I can do 2 hours of character, 1 hour of world, 3 hours of text. I can break it around as I see fit. But all those 3 topics are being touched. And what is interesting, that over the period of rehearsals, if things are evolving well, let's say I've got these 3 strands, I've got the text in the middle, I've got characters on this side and world on that. The work on the characters and the world seem to find their way into the text without any sort of jerkiness. They're just sort of flowing, because the actors have been able to work on the style of the play or on the character, they get more and more confidence to apply it when they're working on the text. Now, at the beginning of the text, I say, stop thinking about character, just explore the situation. So they don't say, oh, what was my character? No, what's the situation? choose what's obvious, and we're building up that way. So that is essentially it. So, for example, do you have a question?
Well, maybe you'll answer this a bit later because I know you're in a flow here. But what you did is you gave us all the examples of the text work. You gave us 3 or 4 the objectives, the counter objectives, all those things, and maybe you just go through those again.
I will do.
But the characters and the world, these are things that we've covered over a load of our talks. But if you can give us the headlines, as it were, so
Okay.
character Laban, all that stuff
Yeah.
as well.
Well, obviously, the character lists are the first thing you do with the character, and you spend your 2 hours a day on working through the characters till you finish them. And then depending on how many characters there are, that can be a week, it could be 10 days. Yeah, you may, if there are characters with less text, you might be able to do 2 in a day. Usually it's 1. Okay, so after they've done that work, I will usually, for the next 2 weeks at least, I would say, or even more, I will start the morning after they've done their warm-up. And sometimes they come in before rehearsals, and if they want to do a very long warm-up, they do it on their own time, as it were. And then I give them another 15, 20 minutes. And then I say, okay, for the next half an hour, I want you to explore your character. Some days I may say to them, work on anything that interests you. On other days, I might say, I want you all to think about this, the way the character walks, or what you find most frightening about the character, or what you find most difficult about the character, or whatever I think is or I want you to do the work the character's doing. If it's a very physical, labor-full sort of world where people actually do physical work, okay? And so depending on the play and what the material is in it, I will make those choices. And from that, I may then start to do improvisations, which are mainly avoiding talking. And I say to the characters, I want you all to imagine you're together in such and such a situation, if I reasonably can, if it's possible to put them all together. It might not be true of the play itself, but could be possible. Or if not, I have to split them up. And I say, okay, I just want you to be together. Let's say you're working together. Just concentrate on the work and see how you feel about the people you're working with. Do you want to smile at some of them? Do you want to avoid others? Do you ask others to help you? So you can use a few words if you want to. If I'm doing a Chekhov where nobody's working, I would say, okay, let's say it's after dinner in the evening, a summer evening, and you all go down to the lakeside and you're just sitting there digesting and dreaming and ruminating, and just see how you feel about the people around you. Do you want to go and sit next to somebody? Do you want to stroke their hand? And just let that evolve so they gradually start to make physical contacts without any need to improvise. Because when actors start to improvise characters with language, all reality goes out of the window, because there's no way in which actors, unless they're incredibly skillful or we've worked for 6 months, could improvise the language of the writer.
Yeah, I get you.
I think you could eventually, even with Shakespeare, if you really were, very good at it, you could have a go, but you'd need to be incredible. So if they just start talking to in contemporary language, half the reality dies and it doesn't work. Okay. So with certain notations. And then if I feel there's anything else they need to do, I will do it. But that would take 3 or 4 weeks anyway. So you're well on the way through rehearsals. Okay. Now, the world of the play is a huge bag which contains anything, which takes the actors away from our contemporary reality and actuality, the way we actually live, beyond naturalism, actually. And it's saying, what does this play need? Okay, so if I'm doing a Lorca play, shall we say, well, I'm doing, let's say, specifically Blood Wedding. It's a very harsh life where everybody works vigorously, physically. The women too, they scrub the floors, they take the sheets to the river and they wash them and they scrub them and they hang, you know, and they grind the meal and so forth and so on. So I will get them to do a lot of work, not worrying about character to start with, but just working, getting into their bodies, getting, you know, making it very important for them and so forth. And let's say I think that hands are very important. I want to believe when I look at the actors that they actually have laborers' hands. Well, so I will spend, say, think about your hands, imagine they're very sort of coarse and twice the size of yours, and and use them with great care because they're precious for you, and spend half an hour exploring. If you're planting things, you have a wonderful feeling for the soil, you have a wonderful feeling for the plants themselves and so forth. Or if you work with wood, you have your hands are both incredibly strong, but they have a wonderful sensitivity to grain, you know, and it's amazing by the actors focusing on that, they can with time convey something about that. So when they use their hands, it's in a particular way. For example, I'll have to, I can't show you unless I can prop my knees. That's not going to really help. People who work hard, farmers, they often come home and they sit and they rest their open hands on their knees. You know. Okay. Those are sort of things. If it's a very stylish period play, like a restoration, then they've got to learn all those bows and curtsies and how people doff their hats and put them on and so, and how they wear their clothes. Now, often this is done very superficially, but actually all those things have meaning. There are degrees of respect to the people you're doing it to, and there's also a lot of huge, you know, sexual implications in the way you bow or kiss a hand or curtsy. Yeah, and how deeply do you bow, and how much of your bosom do you reveal, and so forth and so on, and how do you, and start this without character, because if I often say with these exercises to the actors, if you're worried about your character, you may limit your imagination. Just explore generally, and then gradually your character will select how they do these things. So when they bow, or they curtsy, or it has meaning and it looks very comfortable, very natural, and it doesn't look like an add-on or something that's been choreographed, you know, so it becomes part of the world. And by doing that, actually, they start to develop an innocent emotional sense, because they develop an attitude, because if I use my body in a certain way. So it's those sort of things I do. If it's a Russian, you know, if it's a Chekhov play, they do a lot of touching each other and stroking straight, you know, they're very tactile and stroking faces and cheeks and kissing hands and holding hands. And most of it's not at all sexual, you know, and even people, you know, young girls touching themselves, touching their faces, you know, sort of feeling themselves and so forth. So they develop a physical language is not theirs of now. And so you're looking at all the things that you are trying to reach within this world and finding your journey to it.
And in one of your talks, one of the talks that we've had, you were very, and we won't go over it again, but just to remind people, you did a fantastic thing about Black Dahlia, about the exercises you gave to the actors
Exactly.
for the world.
There's a very good example. You know, in the world, okay, this is a very aggressive world, and the actors have to get the sense that they're used to shoving and pushing people and fighting. You know, they're police guys and they're Americans and so forth, and they're, you know, they're crooks and so forth. So we did a lot of oh god, what do you call contact stuff, you know, touching, and then, for example, dividing the company in half and putting them on either side of the rehearsal room, and then saying, okay, you've got to push your way through and get through to the other side of the characters. There's a lot of jostling, which gives them courage and also teaches them how to do this without hurting anybody else. For me, it's incredibly important that you do not injure the actors or allow themselves to. A lot of actors, I think, a lot of directors, I think, get off on this. You know, I mean, I know some, you know, I've heard of some directors, they do crazy things, and actors are sort of, breaking their ankles, and they're doing God knows what else because they're not being treated properly. So I did a play of, it was a realistic play, but Philip Osmond's, but I wanted to put it on a rake because I wanted to sort of show the characters to the audience in a funny way, rather just that I was presenting them a little bit, although they acted very naturalistically. So because of the risks of working on a rake stage, which can damage your back, especially if you're wearing heels, I had a rake stage in rehearsal from the first day, and I had a physiotherapist and an assistant who was good at movement to give them exercises to make sure they didn't do any damage. And it was wonderful because it was nobody hurt themselves, and they looked very comfortable on doing this. So it's thinking ahead to all the things you need for that world.
Okay.
You see, so that's the principle. And it's really up to the director to use her or his imagination to see what's needed. I like that slot because it makes you very imaginative. What exercises can I get them to do to be good? It could be something like talking very fast. You see, when I've done a couple of 1930s shows, and people talk very, very fast, and rather loudly, very confident. So conversations which probably were intimate, I'd shove them again the width of the room apart, and they talked to each other across the room until it was very natural. And then, for example, you want people to overlap naturally, and that's quite difficult for actors. So there's an exercise I do. You get them comfortable on the floor, very relaxed, and they play the text to each other in a very relaxed state, and they overlap as soon as they think they can. And that gradually goes. So it's that slot where you're dealing with all the elements which are going to inform the world of the play and give extra meaning to the text and give it context and life and imagining. And yes.
No, I'm going to be slightly trivial here because you keep those actors in the rehearsal room, and you've said this before, and I've witnessed it. You keep them in the rehearsal room all the time. Now, most actors are really not used to that. They're given a schedule. You're coming in at 12 o'clock. Your scene is from 12 to 12:30. Now, I understand, but maybe you want to reiterate why you do that. But secondly, surely you must have had some problems with that in the course of your career.
No, the problem is making sure they don't sit around all day doing nothing, watching the others. So you've got to organize ahead, think about your plan so they don't get bored. Yeah, exactly. You see, first of all, let me say, for me, it's anathema that people are just called in for their scenes. It's the most appalling way of creating a show because the actors don't know what's going on in the other scenes. They don't have any relationship to those characters out of the scenes they're in. It's so uncreative, and it creates that sort of a lot of time spent with the leading roles, and the people with smaller roles don't get much to do and do have to kick their heels for 2 lines while the stars are having a big discussion about what they feel they should be doing. I think it is absolutely anti-creativity. It may be very efficient, but it doesn't build an ensemble and it doesn't build a world. So the reason also of keeping everybody there is to build an ensemble. Now, the problem I gave you was to make sure that the actors don't get bored. Now, if you've got the right actors, they love watching each other. They're interested, they're curious because they're learning from watching how the other actors deal with problems that they're going to have to explore. The same exercises, So, and then I try to use them in any exercise I can if they're not a character in the scene. For example, with the feeding in exercise, they feed the lines to a partner. They stand on the perimeter of the acting area and they feed the lines one by one. Yeah.
Now, Mike, I remember you doing that, and that is one thing that you have not talked about.
Oh.
You've never talked about the feeding in experience, exercise. So tell us about that now.
All right, no, I won't. Let me finish this
Oh,
about and I'll come back to it.
okay.
Okay, so there's having everybody in rehearsal it has two purposes: a sense of ensemble, sharing, caring about other, learning from other people, not just from what you do, and making sure that you move the scenes or the material around sufficiently that everybody is not sitting endlessly. You know, if somebody sits for an hour, they'll get out for the next 2 hours or whatever it is. Or you find exercises where they all have to be moving. If you're working on worlds, of course, they can all work on it, and even on character and so forth. Do you see? So, but it is a problem. And also, it's quite clear to me that you don't bring a newspaper in or knitting into rehearsals, or, you know, I mean, even when I was doing a production at the National, there were a couple of actors who'd sort of bring out newspapers and even walked on to do into the space to do a scene holding a cup of coffee, you know, and I just had to nip that in the bud. I mean, I couldn't believe those sort of bad habits. Oh, I didn't know we were doing, oh, are we doing it seriously? And you're thinking, what? You know, anyway, so, and it makes the actors happier, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fair, and you can also, if you're watching people, you can see the people that do get bored, who do lose interest. And you know, you just clock that just to watch if it's a danger signal or whether you can adjust it. You tend to try and give those people more things to do to serve the others. Do you know, give them responsibility? I don't know. It's a journey. Okay, so that essentially is the way I do it. And all things being equal, this process will evolve, and you're not looking for results. You just see what happens. And one day when you least expect it, you think, oh God, it's starting to come alive. Oh, fantastic. You know, really wonderful. I do give them dates by which they should know the lines to, say, Act 1, and then Act 2, and then Act 3, and then Act 4. And when I get to the last stages of rehearsal, we are mainly working on the scenes with points of concentration and so forth, and doing group exercises together. Now, if towards the end of rehearsals, I did feel I wanted to sort of focus on a scene with a couple of actors, and it didn't seem much point for everybody to be there, I'd say, okay, look, you two guys come in an hour earlier, okay, and something like that. But that very rarely happens. And so also the other thing I do, which I'm trying to ease the journey on from rehearsal room into the technical, dress rehearsal, performance. So I try to introduce into the rehearsal room all the technology I possibly can in advance. So the sound can certainly be there, right? The costumes, I will say, look, I'm sorry, I can't wait till the technical to put them into clothes they haven't worn, because it's going to disturb them, confuse them, and take their focus and bugger up the first performance previews, whatever it is. So I want them to be able to wear their clothes at least 2 weeks before we open. Oh, we won't be ready. Oh, please have them ready. Oh, they'll get dirty. They can be long. In actual fact, once the actors have had them on a few times, they do not want to wear them all the way through the final rehearsal. It's very interesting. Yeah, you know, and you make sure they have, well, I think this is common practice, but you make sure they have good surrogate clothes, jackets, heels, long skirts, something, corsets, so that they're there. And also to have the real props, if possible, let them be brought in. I want all the real ones, say 2 or 3 weeks before. And we have, you know, surrogate props up until that point, because a prop is, and the furniture, because a prop, however much it's like it stands in for something, it's different. The weight is different, the texture is different, and so forth. The chair you sit in, you know. So everything's there except the lighting. And in one glorious occasion, I was rehearsing in Israel, and they had a very, very big space in which they could rehearse. It's a big warehouse, and they'd set up almost a complete lighting rig. So the lighting designer was quietly lighting away all through the last 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsal. So they could get more involved with it and feel it and look at it. So that was wonderful. So when you get to technicals, you don't get those hysterical things that go on for hours and hours and hours, and everybody getting bad-tempered and exhausted, and and often in technicals or dresses, I will give the actors points of concentration to keep them interested, because I do say to the actors, look, the technical, you've had me for 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, if you're lucky. This is the technician's day. They take pride of post. So please be there. Please give them respect, and please, be there for their use, you see. And in order for the actors not to be bored, I give them points of concentration, explore the set, explore your costume, and so forth and so on. Play around with that while you're playing, you see. So then it eases, the stage is easy. And a lot of actors have said to me, oh, it was such a pleasure just moving. It seems so seamless from the first day of rehearsal. I mean, that's ideal. It doesn't, there can be bumps along the road, obviously. But that's the purpose, to be creative, constructing, to allow things to happen so that things evolve through the actors, because it's what the actors do finally that's going to be the show. You give them all this stuff and they use it as their imaginations and skills allow them. And you can adjust little things here and there, but basically that's the purpose, that you're saying to the actors, I'm going to feed you with other stuff. It's about like the first huge chunk of rehearsal, like 3/4, 4/5 of rehearsal, are input. And then only towards the end do we get the output, the feedback. Yeah. And I must be patient. Unless I see something going wildly wrong or veering wildly off course. But that's the principle. And then I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm going. The actors feel secure. And then if you feel they're getting too secure with this structure, you can throw them a few curved balls. You can come and say, today we're going to do this. And they say, oh, we usually do. And you say, today you're going to do something else. So they don't get sort of complacent or too comfortable a routine. You suddenly throw a spanner in the works, and then you go back.
But I wonder whether, as a very young director, you had the confidence to, as it were, put your first coat of paint on, which is all this work that you're doing, and you're saying, look, I'm not interested in the results yet. We're just feeding stuff in. Were you that confident as a young director?
Oh, good God, this has been years. Only when I really got to, well, no, it was before shared experience. Actually, funnily enough, I found my freedom initially at Lambda teaching way back. But before that, and even then, up to that point, I was always staging the shows, fixing where they were more or less, and I was keeping it relatively open, but no, nothing to this. This whole process has evolved, trying exercises, thinking, what structure do I need? There's a gap here. How could I fill this? Oh, that exercise I always used to do, that's outlived its usefulness. I don't need that anymore. So it's been a journey, which can lead me now to talking about feeding in, because that's a very good example of feeling there was a gap between something. So just to reiterate, the journey through the text work is actions, text, no text, text, with exploring objectives. And then I felt I don't want the actors to have to carry books around with them. I don't want them to have scripts in their hands. How can I make this next journey before they're totally free of the script? And I had this idea that they would be very familiar with their text by now, maybe not knowing, but they'd know, and they'd know a lot about their characters and the world. It would be in week 3, 4, something like that, that I would say, okay, I'm going to do a scene with actors A, B, C, D, and I'd like actors E, F, G, H to feed them their lines. And so this was initially to let the actors feel that they more or less knew the script. So when they got off script totally, they wouldn't feel totally naked. But then I saw a much more useful purpose for it, which was if they were fed their lines thought by thought, beat by beat, they could take their time to explore every minor thought in the play in detail, like put a magnifying glass on the smallest thing and really blow it up. And because often actors don't see transitions, they just plow through a speech,
Mm.
you know, and there's no thought going on. And so there would be, the process was the actor has to have their objective there, and this they'd worked on. They've got to be focused on what they want. They're fed the line. They take as long as they want until they feel I'm going to do this with it. And they can make any choice they want. It's just totally their imagination. It's not going to be their final decision that's got to stay forever. It's how do I play this? And then they play it as fully as they can. And the other partner reacts to that. And then they get fed another thought and they find the transition, and you say, you can never play two thoughts or two beats the same way. Everything's got to be different. You know, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it's better to. You know, they've got to push, so they've got pushing out the envelope of possibilities. So things like a Shakespearean O takes on, rather than just being dumped at the beginning of the line, oh, there's too solid flesh. Oh, that this, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's actually, the difficulty with this exercise is the actors have to sustain the gaps while they're waiting, because you don't want to rush the actors. And it's not about being slow, it's about taking the time you need. If your mind is working very rapidly in your imagination, you go faster, but you explore till you're ready. So when you play a line, it's like you're hitting a bullseye. You know, you've got the darts board and you're going boom, da, 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 boom, you know. And I've had some of my best rehearsals. In fact, there have been occasions where the actual performances were never as good as that particular one, because emotional things come up you never expected. People make choices you think, oh my God, I can't believe, and it's very exhilarating and it's very free. Anyway, so basically that's that.
One question I wanted to ask, though, in relation to that, is that I'm feeding you, and I say, and the line, the line is, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. But I could just give you the O.
Yes, because that's a thought.
Yeah.
You see.
And then, but let's change it to, if I may, I'd like to ask you a question, but I need to make it clear what I'm asking. So could I go, if I may?
No, because if I may doesn't mean anything. If I may, I'd like to ask you a question. That's a complete thought.
Yeah.
Or but is another thought. Do you see? No, it's got to be a complete, you see, there are certain phrases like, since I've been here,
I see.
I've fallen in love with the countryside. Since I've been here, it means nothing. So sometimes you have to do a whole long sentence to get the whole thought. It's very tricky with Shakespeare because he puts so many intervening clauses between the beginning and ending of a thought. So you have to decide, do the actors have to tackle 3 lines, or should I just not be such a purist and let them start the idea and then play over individual thoughts in between? And that's a decision you make. Now, if the actor feeding in gives too many thoughts, the actor playing them has the skill to say, I'm just going to do one at a time. You see, and you also say to the people feeding in, you are supporting the actor in the scene. you've got to be there for them. You've got to judge when they're just indulging themselves, and also more likely when they're rushing, and not, which is probably the tendency, not giving themselves time to think. So the way you feed can vary, in speed and so forth. You don't have to yell the lines out, nor do you have to whisper them. You just say them very in an ordinary voice. Also, try not to give them any interpretation, because obviously an actor will instinctively give those lines a reading. I just want you to make them a factual. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. Because otherwise the actor receiving them picks up the rhythm, and that's often happened, and it can get tedious. Some actors love it. Sometimes it can be a bit tedious if the actor simply can't cope with the technique. But it is good because you're making sure that every thought has been examined. Because I know myself as a director, I can be so preoccupied with a part of the text and assume another part of the text is totally clear. And then suddenly, towards the end of rehearsal, I think, oh my God, I didn't realize that line that I've been taking for granted is so important, or that phrase. So it's a very useful exercise. And like all good exercises, it has more than one use and implication. It keeps the actors together. It makes them share. It makes them imaginative. It makes them daring. Makes them flexible, and so forth. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Good.
Okay. So do you think you've covered the idea of, a rehearsal process? Do you think?
Yes, I think I have. Just so the text is the actions, the point of text, no text, with the objectives being sort of the feeding in or reading in, and then the points of concentration. And that's going down the middle of rehearsals, and on the side, together with it, in parallel, we're exploring character and world. And of course, for the actors, when they're doing the character lists and they're all there, they're hearing the text over and over again, being distilled in different ways. So even if it's not their character, they hear their character lines being sort of distilled and selected. So they're getting an inundation of text as well on the way. So yes, I think I've carried it away in principle. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay, Mike, well, we'll bring this talk to a close, and maybe talk to you in a while.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button, and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.